What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical, average American here today to react and learn about how Quebec plans to save itself from English. Well, as an American, I had no idea that Quebec needed saving from English. And to be honest, I find this to be a very interesting choice of words as well, as if Quebec is being beaten down, beaten or attacked by English in some way, but I'm not sure. I know Quebec is, of course, a French-speaking part of Canada, and today I'm just interested in learning a bit more about this, how Quebec plans to save itself from English. So, with that being said, let's take a look.
This is a graph showing the percentage of French speakers in Quebec. Put simply, the language has been declining since 2001.
Whoa! Really? This is an interesting chart. French speakers in Quebec are on the decline? Yeah, this is Quebec households from 82% down to 78. It's only like a 4% decrease, but heck, that's not nothing. That's definitely not nothing. That's significant. Okay, I didn't know that French is in decline in Quebec. Is this a thing? This is what this video title means. How Quebec has to save itself from English, but rather try to maintain its French heritage is another way you could say, I think.
Even if slowly. It's quite a hard thing to come to terms with. I mean, Quebec is the only province in Canada where the francophones make up the majority of the population. And for Quebec...
Francophone. Francophone. I like that word. I didn't know. Francophone. Oh, man. That sounds like an invention. Like a hot dog and a telephone put together. Okay, I'll stop now.
Because preserving the French language is the only possible safeguard for the survival of the Quebec identity and culture. So in a world where everything is dominated by English-speaking media, Quebec is trying to save their province from Anglicization. But to understand not only how, we must first understand the way in which French initially survived.
Oh, how French... Okay, we're getting a little bit of a history lesson on how French, like, why French is so popular in Quebec in particular. I really want to know why French is on the decline in Quebec, actually. That intrigues me.
Canada was initially a French colony within the larger territory of New France after being claimed in 1535.
Okay.
But following the successful conquest of New France by British forces during the Seven Years' War, it became a part of the Kingdom of Great Britain in 1763.
Right.
During all this, a period of violence and unrest was constant between the French-speaking population and the British.
Really? Maybe this is good for me. I know a little bit about this Canadian history. A little bit. But this is good for me to hear, actually.
Continued during the American Revolution, with many of them siding with the Americans. All of this growing tension made the British fear that due to the proximity and already well-formed alliance, the Americans would help the inhabitants of New France rebel against British rule.
Okay.
So rather than engage in another costly war at the same time to try colonize them, Britain reluctantly passed the Quebec Act of 1774 to...
Really? This goes back so far. I had no idea. Quebec Act of 1774. You better believe we are not learning about this in our American history classes here. What did this do?
Maintain peace, which allowed them to have French as their official language, use French law, and stay Catholic. Or, in other words, keep their culture.
Wow, so in a weird way, it sounds like America kind of helped Quebec be French in a roundabout way. Like, apparently the British didn't kick out the French out of Canada because they were scared of a rebellion, and then America would, like, attack as well, and Britain basically said, okay, Quebec, fine. Keep your French. And that's why, yeah, that's cool. That's a cool little fact. I'm glad to have Well, personally, I played absolutely zero role in any of that. But I'm still going to claim a little bit of credit in true American fashion.
Culture. This rebelling against the English by preserving the French language really set the stage for everything we've seen since, and is still present
Okay.
today. Many
Okay.
laws, acts, and bills have been passed since in order to assure that the French language would remain alive and well in Quebec. During the
Yeah.
Quiet Revolution of the 1960s, which was basically a period of intense socio-political and socio-cultural change in French Canada,
Huh.
Quebec created the French Language Office, which
Quiet Revolution. I'm not sure what that is either. This was in the 60s? Some kind of. I do know that Quebec had like a vote to possibly become independent of Canada. That vote failed. So I know about that. There's actually a lot of French Canadian history I just frankly don't know about. No pun intended. Frankly, that I francophonely don't know about. Okay, I really need to stop now.
was a public institution responsible for the assurance of the correct usage of French and enrichment of the spoken and written language.
Nice.
In 1974, the Official Languages Act was adopted, making French the sole official language of Quebec. But that
Wow.
wasn't enough though. So then came the Charter of the French Language, aka Bill 101 in 1977, requiring that French must be the language of legislation in the courts, administration, work, business, and education. Even in 2020, there was an amendment introduced to Bill 101 that stated that all government communications would be exclusively in French when
Wow. 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 So much of Quebec is French, which is great. Great for Quebec, but just thinking, like for this from my American perspective, logistically, how difficult must that make, Quebec being a part of Canada and the Canadian federal government, like literally does everyone have to know English and French? Like in the Quebec government for sure to communicate with the federal national Canadian government. This just sounds difficult. I've never thought about it this deeply, but I'm starting to understand why it might be difficult for Quebec to maintain its French culture and French heritage if it's existing in basically if Quebec is existing within an English speaking country. Quebec happens to be a part of that country, but Quebec is almost like a country within a country in a weird way. I don't know. Like America has Hawaii, for example. Hawaii is part of America, but Hawaii is like it's over there. Hawaii has its own amazing culture to it. Yeah, I think that's a decent analogy.
communicating with other government bodies and companies. So, with all this in place, you'd think that Quebec would be able to protect the French language from declining, right? Well, it's not that simple. In
Okay.
fact, it hasn't really worked, besides slowing the decline of it. The proportion of Quebecers who only speak French as their primary official language fell from 83.7% in 2016 to 82.2% in 2021.
Okay, so in the last few years, this is a little out of date. This is 3 years old now. But the percentage of people in Quebec who speak French as their main language is going down. Yeah, so they've passed a lot of laws and made sure a lot of things are in place in Quebec to protect the French language. Now I understand that, but it's declining. And is the reason because it's just more convenient to speak English in Canada? Because the majority of Canadians speak English, or is something happening in Quebec I don't know about where the French is declining? I don't know.
And in that same time period, the number of people speaking English as their primary language increased from 12 to 13%.
Okay.
So in total, the English-speaking population has increased by 1.2 million, while
Wow.
the French-speaking population has increased by 120,000,
Wow.
10 times less. Now, this is obviously scary news for Quebecers. So, as a result, the nationalist coalition Avenir Quebec, or CAQ for short, was re-elected in October of 2022 and gained a huge parliamentary majority on the premise that it would protect French as the dominant language in Quebec.
This is a Canadian political party? Is this right? the Rassemblement Quebec? CAQ Quebec? Okay. So Quebec has like a decent amount of representation in the Canadian government. So that's good.
Quebec. As for how they plan to do this, well, let me introduce you to Bill 96. Passed into law on June 1st, 2022, and
Okay.
set to roll out in the coming years, this is without a doubt the most comprehensive bill ever passed by the Quebec government.
Really?
Cited as a language protection bill, Bill 96 is set to reshape many aspects of public life for Quebecers.
This is a French language bill. It was passed only 2 years ago. This is like big news, especially in Quebec. I have not heard about this at all.
First part has to deal with immigration. See, declining birth rates among francophone Quebecers has been a key problem for quite some time. With less and less native Quebec people, you can't expect the language to be passed on to new generations as a first language they're most comfortable in. Even with
Oh, that's tricky, isn't it? That's tricky. So literally, well, I think this is happening all around the world, is that birth rates are going down in a lot of countries. Like the population is going to decline in the United States, I know that. In China as well, famously. And in Canada, even in Quebec, the French speakers aren't having as much children, perhaps to replace the population, teach their children French and all that. Couple that with increased immigration into Quebec, with people who are speaking English or other languages even, and that would explain, those two things would explain why French is on the decline in Quebec. Wow, that's tough, because I don't actually see a very obvious solution for the French speakers in Quebec to that.
With immigrants coming to try replenish these numbers, they're simultaneously contributing to the fall of French. More and more allophones, which in Canada are people who speak neither English or French as a first language, are choosing to learn English rather than French. In 2021, 25% of immigrants said English was their first official language spoken, up from 18% in 2016. The trend was reversed on the French side, from 61 to 55% in the same amount of time. Quebec Premier François Legault has claimed that speaking French at home is key to preserving the French language. And
Yeah, because if you're immigrating to Canada, you're probably at best learning English. I mean, I would assume. So it's like a double whammy. Maybe if people are immigrating to Canada, they're going to increase the English speakers, if anything, not the French speaking. So yeah.
It's been calculated that 55% needs to be closer to 90% in order to maintain the linguistic balance in the province. Now, the answer to this problem possibly lies in new immigration restrictions, part of Bill 96. In previous governments, about 50 to 60% of economic immigrants who selected to immigrate to Quebec spoke French, but now it's been upped to a minimum percentage of 80%, with the ultimate goal.
Wait, what was, hold on, I didn't understand that part.
In previous governments, about 50 to 60% of economic immigrants who selected to immigrate to Quebec spoke French, but now it's been upped to a minimum percentage of 80%.
So they're making sure if you're immigrating to Quebec, 80% of the people immigrating speak French. Yeah, that's a way to do it. You literally have to select for, that has to be a requirement, basically. I was thinking, what on earth do you do to fix this? To sort of preserve the French-speaking culture of Quebec, since it's declining. Yeah, I mean, the facts are, one of the only ways is to make sure the people speak French.
With the ultimate goal of having an intake of 100% French-speaking immigrants by 2026.
Wow.
In the meantime, if you're one of those non-French-speaking immigrants, it's quite tough. Upon arrival in Quebec, immigrants are allowed to receive services in English for up to 6 months. The refusal or inability to communicate in French a mere 6 months after arrival will result in the halting of all services unless it's extremely important to your health.
No kidding. Whoa. See, this is not like an issue in the United States. This is very unique to Canada, very unique to Quebec, I think, where you have to put in these laws and regulations over what language you can speak. But hey, it's tricky, because it's like, yeah, you want to respect the culture and the language of people immigrating to your country, but your own culture and your own language deserves to be preserved and respected as well, right? Like, at the same time. So, yeah, I can see how this is tricky. So, if you move to Quebec and you don't speak French, they give you 6 months to you better learn it. You better get on board. You better crack open that Duolingo app on your phone or bust out the books. You better learn some French because after 6 months, they're just gonna stop. How does that work exactly? The people just literally stop talking in English to you, and they're like, no, no, no. Tu parles français. just instantly?
Use of any other language is forbidden past that 6-month mark, which, to say the least, is very intense. Luckily though, there's also been a proposition to create a one-stop service center for learning French. Francization Quebec. Combining
Well, they're providing literally they're providing resources. They're like, if you immigrate to Quebec, here's a place where you can go learn French. Please learn the French, and everything will be cool. This is wow. Yeah, again, I gotta say, this is really, really interesting from my American point of view because we don't have any kind of thing going on remotely like this. It's like if you're in America, you're speaking English. If you don't speak English, that is a rarity. That is very rare. Or if you're bilingual, for that matter, we're like, whoa, check out this guy. He speaks another language. Wow, that's like quite rare here.
services which are currently spread across multiple ministries. The goal of this is to offer convenient language services and resources to newcomers in order to help them integrate and ultimately streamline the immigration process.
Nice.
But the message is clear. The government is now prioritizing the revitalization of the French language at all costs.
Yeah.
This is just one aspect of Bill 96.2. In the courts and justice system, judges will no longer be required to know any other specific language other than French. While Quebecers will always have the right to seek justice in the courts in either English or French, the reality of how common it will be to have a bilingual judge going forward has now been called into question.
Wow, it's interesting because I don't know why, but I assumed in Quebec most people are bilingual, that you speak French and English. It sounds like that's not actually really the case. Sounds like there's a lot of people in Quebec that just speak French. And that is how they like it. And that is how you live in Quebec. You speak French. I don't know why. It's just because I'm American and like I'm used to English everywhere. My brain I couldn't wrap my brain around like, oh, they have to speak some English there. They gotta. It's like, no. Like Quebec is French speaking. And there are many people in Quebec, and judges even, they're saying, that will just speak French. I didn't know it was that. I knew it was French. I didn't know it was that French. Like, I thought if you went to Quebec, you could maybe get around speaking English. Now I'm not so sure, actually.
When it comes to the government, elected politicians and ministers will not be required to have any knowledge of English either.
Wow.
In terms of business, while companies providing goods and services with 50 or more employees are already required to serve their clients in French, the threshold has now been lowered to a minimum of 25 employees.
Wow.
So as to make sure small businesses are doing it as well, being required to go through a French certification process verifying that all internal and external communications are in French. Business contracts must...
So, like, yeah, it's legal everywhere in Quebec. Like, you can just speak French. That makes sense to me. Like, it's Quebec's government that's doing this. Quebec is French speaking. It kind of reinforces my opinion that Quebec is very unique. And it's almost like its own little culture, its own little country in a way.
Must be drawn up in French, and if there are versions of a contract in two languages, the French will take priority if there is a discrepancy.
Wow.
A company's pleadings in court will also obviously have to be in French, or translated into French too. In terms of education reform, it's also a bit wild. For students in elementary or high school, Bill 96 is putting a 3-year cap on the number of years children of foreign temporary workers or foreign students can attend school in English. For students of college age, the total number of them allowed in English language colleges as a proportion of overall students can't be higher than the year before, and will also be capped at 17.5% of the total provincial college population.
Wow. So, this is how Quebec plans to save itself from English, or in other words, promote French speaking. And it's to make it, Quebec is making it so everywhere in Quebec, people are gonna speak French. It's really, really encouraging and mandating that you speak French in businesses, in law, in the schools. So, yeah, as far as I was wondering, how on earth is Quebec going to reverse this trend? This is what you'd have to do. I was thinking this would be a lot. Like, it'd be tough. You'd have to put in some pretty, like, severe regulations. That is essentially what Quebec is doing. Quebec is like, okay, there's only so many ways to solve this language problem, and they're doing everything to promote and encourage French speaking. That makes a lot of sense.
Access to English language programs in French colleges will be reduced too. The mandatory French language exams that students must pass in order to graduate from French colleges will also be extended to francophones and allophones studying at English colleges.
Wow.
The new law says that a student who doesn't have the speaking and writing knowledge of French required by the government can't get a diploma.
Wow.
So this means whether or not you studied at an English or French university, you'll need to take a French exam, and if you fail, you can't graduate.
Wow. You can't even get an education in Quebec unless you speak French. So everyone is going to be speaking French, basically, or I don't know. You're essentially going to have to leave because you can't hardly get a job or graduate high school or use any of the systems. It's really promoting or requiring French literacy now.
The last part of the bill essentially focuses on enforcing everything it's doing. See, in 2003, the French Language Office of the past was renamed to the Quebec Board of the French Language, or OQLF for short, and has begun acting almost like a language police ever since.
Okay.
If Quebecers think their right as customers to be informed and served in French isn't met, they can send a complaint.
That's right. No more of this. No more of this. Call us for cakes. No, no, no. No, no, no. You're gonna have to parlay pour un cakes. None of this English on the businesses anymore. But seriously, this is what I'm joking about it, but I thought you could get by with English in Quebec for some reason. I thought Quebec was very bilingual. This really shows me maybe that's what was happening, but now Quebec is making a big effort to remain French and save itself from English, from the cakes, calling us for cakes.
They can send a complaint to the OQLF to get things sorted. As for if it works, let's see. In 2013, they told off an Italian restaurant for having too much Italian on its menu when French should be the predominant language.
Wow. It seems harsh. It does seem harsh, especially when you hear stories like that, but it sounds like Quebec is having a crisis in a way, or it perceives that Quebec is having a crisis of its culture, losing its culture. So extreme measures are being taken, and you're gonna have to get your Italian pasta menus out of here and make it French. Normally, like in America, that'd be just crazy. But there's no emergency here. In Quebec, there's an emergency. They're trying to save the language, apparently. So in this circumstance, it makes some sense.
Language. In 2015, they forced a hospital in Gasp to take down bilingual signposts they had up, even though a sizable English-speaking population live in the region.
Okay. Yeah, this is tough. This is a little iffy. It's tough. Quebec is in a transitionary period. So there's hospitals where there's English and English speakers. And if you're living in these areas of Quebec and you speak English, you need this hospital. But at the same time, Quebec is basically not making any exceptions. Just saying everyone, no matter what business you are, you have to switch to French. And maybe that's what it takes to save French in Quebec, but it's going to be a rough transitionary period. It's going to be a learning curve, it sounds like.
The OQLF has even demanded that small stickers on restaurant windows that say stuff like recommended by TripAdvisor be taken down since it's not in French.
Wow.
Really, there's countless examples, and Bill 96 basically gives them more power.
Wow.
They have newfound jurisdiction to inspect workplaces and seize materials at will without a warrant if they suspect English is being used.
Oh my god, this makes it sound so extreme. Like they're storming your house. If you have like a pack of Skittles in your house, and it's not like les Skittles, it's like just regular Skittles. Skittles isn't even an English word, like it's made up word. I don't know. If you have I don't know, something around your house. Here we go. Jergens soothing aloe. There you go. Don't ask me why I have this. If you have this in your house in Quebec, they might come for you. I gotta put this away. What am I doing with this? But that's English on the bottle. And in Quebec, they literally, I mean, maybe this is an exaggeration, but it's basically saying if you got English stuff on your business or your home, or that's gonna have to change if you want to live in Quebec.
It's now easier to make complaints if you feel your right to communication in French was violated. Complaints can now be truly enforced better, and financial penalties have been increased up to $22,000. The Office of the French Language may seem like a rampaging institution of linguistic extremism to some, but to others, it's a strong protector of an important culture.
Yeah.
You need to remember that Quebec is a province that's basically surrounded by over 350 million speakers of another language.
Yeah.
And it's not just any language either, it's English, the most powerful and global one out there. So these drastic measures sort of make sense.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think I understand what Quebec is doing. I might sound a little judgmental or critical, but I believe me, I'm not. I understand. Like Quebec, again, it voted to stay a part of Canada, but Quebec is the most unique like part of Canada as far as like a province is concerned, for sure. They're trying to preserve the Quebec culture, the French culture. And that's a tricky thing to do because culture is like this undefinable, intangible thing. So it's hard to be like, oh, let's just increase that, you know? Like, increase what? It's the culture? How? Well, Quebec has come up with like some actual actions and measurable ways to do this, and it's mostly by mandating French be written and spoken in all of Quebec, no matter what your background is. If you want to exist in Quebec, you got to get on board. Maybe some people will view that as harsh or difficult to adapt to, but I don't know. I guess you just got to live somewhere else because Quebec's doing it. The Quebec government is on board. The French speakers of Quebec, I don't know what you think about all this, but I assume like Quebecois are in favor of this, preserving your heritage. Like, I understand. I definitely understand. This was very interesting. Very, very interesting. Especially as an American, I had no idea about this at all. This video was by Versed. I gotta give it a like, because I did enjoy this quite a bit. Very interesting topic. I still, this is just my, American reaction, opinion on this. Some of this stuff, I don't know what I'm talking about, but nonetheless, there's my hot takes on how Quebec is indeed trying to save itself from English. I had no idea, but I enjoyed this. Anyway, if you enjoyed this as well, feel free to give this video a like or leave a comment with your thoughts on Quebec trying to save French in Quebec, save itself from English. I still think that's such a funny way of saying it. Quebec trying to save French, preserve its culture, especially if you're Canadian or if you're from Quebec. That'd be fascinating to hear from your point of view on all this, because goodness knows I have a pretty limited understanding. So, yeah. Anyway, if you're interested in more videos like this, me reacting to Canada and Canadian culture, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching, and see you next time.